Okay, next project experiment. And I'm going to make this one as simple as possible for now because I don't really want to mess with it. But here's the deal. First of all, this is a good book to have. It's pretty advanced and complicated, and believe me, I don't understand 99% of what's in it. But it's by Merlin Blincow, or Blinco. I think he's from England. Designing 2 preamps for guitar and bass. He has one for power supplies, which I have. But back at the very back, there's a section about heater wire lead dress, page 284. And here's a picture of the right way and the wrong way. The top is the wrong way, the bottom is the right way. See how nice and twisted the wires are right up to the socket. No hum loops around the socket. Now, mind you that the amp is not that noisy, but according to all the experts, they are wired incorrectly because, and I'm thinking at Fender it was that it was an assembly line. They did have a time constraint. They were in somewhat of a hurry. So I'm thinking, I mean, they made it look nice and neat, and that's why I hate messing with the wires, because look how pretty they laid those down that corner of the chassis. Right here, nice winding. It's very stiff, been there for 56 years. But from that point, they didn't do such a great job. There's even a little footnote here on page 286. Most commercial amplifiers do make this mistake, and correcting it will always reduce the hum levels. And that is very important, not to create a loop of heater wire around a valve socket. That's what he's saying. Most of them make the mistake. And that's not actually what I'm going to mess with today, but I'll show you the heater wire loop around the socket. Exactly what he's talking about. Very nice looking wiring, but there's no twist. The twist is there to neutralize or cancel out the magnetic, I'm going to call it flux, which I think that's probably correct. When current flows through these wires, it actually creates a magnetism around them, and that the reason you twist them is to cancel out some, if not, well, as much as you can, cancel out the magnetism. And they actually want these things wound very tightly. Now, this is solid core wire. I think it's 18 gauge. I'm going to use this piece, which I think is, but I'm only going to put a short piece here, and I'll explain that in a second. But it's very heavy wire. They say if you twist it, the solid core wire too tightly, it will break internally somewhere. So they recommend braided wire, but Fender always used this solid heavy gauge wire, and it has to be heavy because it carries a lot of current, or heavier than the other wires. I think this is probably 18 gauge, and then as you get down here, it doesn't look like they switch, but in some amps the builders will switch down to a 20 gauge, which is a little lighter. But as you see, I've got these loops going around that look nice and neat, but they cross over the yellow wires, which are where the signal is. You really want to keep, not too much on this side, but you want to keep these wires away from these wires, and these aren't twisted either. If you do cross, you want them to go at a 90-degree angle, which they did that. Like I said, the amp is not, it's acceptable right now, and that's why I'm not going to mess with these. I say that, I know myself. I'll be twisting these things and running them up over the socket. Now, if you look at a blackface super reverb circuit, all the heater wires are up here and running way up in the air to stay away from everything, and they just jump from one socket to the next up in the air, twisted, which they probably realized was a better method. But this is the old style. And what they've done is they've gotten the polarity backwards, which some people say 50% of the Fender amps wired back in the late 50s or in the 50s were wrong, incorrect. But if this wire comes from the transformer to this pin, then when it leaves this pin to go to the next power tube socket, which the power tubes are more important as far as hum canceling, it should go to this same pin. That way it acts as a humbucker and cancels some of the hum. But in this case, they ran very nicely neat wires from there to here, and from this one to that one. So they're not the same. Now my 60, I checked it, my 1960, and it's wired correctly. I don't know if we switched it or they just happened to get lucky. But we're going to switch this one, and instead of undoing all these twists and winds and everything, I'm just going to unsolder this one, run this, keep this one on there, because that goes to the first preamp or the phase inverter, and I'll check those later. But right now this is just an experiment on the power tube hum, and I'm going to take this one off here, put it here, and then I'm going to run a jumper from here just straight across there so I can get the idea of what it's going to sound like, and we'll see if it makes a difference. Okay, I made my little wire bridge here. So I switched these two, took that one off, put it on here, wired a little jumper to take this one across. Hopefully my soldering is okay. But I'm going to turn the amp on. Just a few seconds. One thing I also wanted to point out, I was looking at my 1960, which is, I call it the gold standard. But I don't know why I never looked at the heater wires, but they must have messed with those too, because my heater wires on the 1960, and you think it would be noisier, but I know the tubes are wired, the power tubes are wired correctly. But when I get right here on the 1960, this little winding jumps track and goes all the way across all these input jacks for the speakers, and comes over here, and it's just kind of a jumbled mess. So somebody messed with it before, and hopefully it wasn't me, I don't think it was, but I had actually pushed it over and put it in the corner like it's supposed to be, and I'll probably work on that one a little bit too, just to get it looking good. But the twists have to go right up to the socket, so that's going to be the hard part. I did notice that the only wire I have is a little lighter gauge, so luckily this is just temporary, and I hope to maybe take all this little assembly off, wire assembly, flip it around to where the wires reach correctly, because right now this one's too short. But I'll turn it on here in a second. To flip off a standby. Those were volumes all the way up. Well, that's cranked. You can still hear it hums, but put it both volumes on 3.5 right now, which is what I usually play at, somewhere around there. Now, does it make a difference? Not sure. Okay, well, put it back to the way it was. Let's see if we hear anything. I mean, amp's home no matter what, but some of that could be this heater loop, which, you know, there's magnetism coming off of this. Two things. This is a pain in the butt, and now I know why I probably shouldn't have messed with it. And this wire is very brittle, solid core, and broke every time I bent it trying to twist the wires. I decided, everything I read said if you don't twist the wires right up to the socket, then you've defeated the whole purpose and it won't work anyway. So I thought I'd put a couple more twists in there, and in the process I kept breaking my little jumper wire, so I had to go to a braided wire. And so we're going to try again just to make sure that I wasn't seeing no effect because it wasn't twisted. And I still don't have a twisted gray, but you can see it's a little better. I don't know. In some ways, it actually may have helped a little bit. Now, the good thing is I go back and watch this video, and I can jump around and see on video, which the camera mic almost seems to be more sensitive than my ear, but sounds pretty good. So now we need to try to figure out how to get these off without breaking them. That would be not good. Alright, one thing I want to remind everybody of, and I mean, even though I know how to do it, you can still forget sometimes to unplug the amp, discharge the capacitors before you start messing with this, because you really don't want to touch those power tube sockets where they connect to the main capacitors. But got my little harness out, a little twisted pair of lead of heater wires, and now I'm going to try to finagle these things around. Now it's 3 o'clock now. Finagle them around to where I can get them in the right spot. But you can see that this wire ended up, this long piece right here is a short piece here, so they definitely were not real concerned about getting them in the same pins. I said I think they were in a hurry and they made them look good, because it's a real pain to twist those things, go over the sockets, twist it right up to the socket. Probably takes too much time. They weren't willing to do it that finely. Alright, I got it done. Don't really recommend messing with these things. I'll tell you what, that took me probably 30-45 minutes. No wonder they didn't do it in the factory. I mean, it's not that hard if you do it right the first time, but hopefully you can't tell that I even messed with it. I don't think you can. I mean, except for the cleaner solder joints. They were pretty ragged looking, but got my twisted pair in there. They're going to the right pins. Resoldered the connection there at the pilot light. Those are some stiff wires, and I couldn't really twist these, but I finagled it around to where, you know, twisted it as much as I can. So let's see, it's on standby. We'll turn it on and hopefully everything's working. Looks like the heaters on the power tubes are on. So it should be passing itself down to the preamp tube. So here we go. Well, it didn't hurt anything. Not so sure helped anything, but at least I know it's correct. I've come to the conclusion that I am just a solder junkie and like to solder things. So, and it's fun. It is a little challenging at times, but got it done, and I don't think it looks so bad. Alright, well, let's go play the amp and see how that works out. Okay, this video the heater wire video that you just watched, I wasn't even going to post it because after I plugged the amp in, I had this horrible static. And I've been sweating and fighting it for the last 3 hours, I guess. And the reason I'm showing you this is because this is what happens. And I mean, a lot of times it's just pure coincidence. Here I am, I switched the heater wires, all of a sudden it starts making noise. So I went through the whole troubleshooting process again. Well, I pulled out the tubes. I didn't think it was these, but I did check these, put in all new tubes, power tubes, the old rectifier that was bad, but it still sounded okay. Getting a horrible static on big bass notes, big chords. Single notes were fine. Double notes, forget it, man. And then, you know, I've talked to some people. What happens with speakers sometimes is you can unplug them and they might be bad, but you'll still hear the noise because they still vibrate sympathetically with the other speakers even though they're not plugged in. So you can't just unplug the speakers and hope that you eliminate a bad speaker. So you really have to remove the speakers, and I just finished removing all of these speakers one at a time, and this one is an original cone over here. And it was in perfect shape, and that one was good. This one right here was good, one of the top ones. Now, I'm still not absolutely positive this is the problem, but this is what I was looking for. Here's the other top one. Now listen, this is, you have to be very careful, but this is one way you can find out. For coil rub, you hear that? That's what was making that noise. Now, what a crappy coincidence that it happened right after I did all this work. I guess the amp was so powerful that it just blew it right off the first note. Here's the other one, recombed by the same guy, which I'm going to tell you I don't recommend to him anymore. See, I'm pushing this one in and out. No noise at all. But go back to this one. I can even hear some kind of, sounds like a wire, probably on the voice coil, is sitting there hanging up on something. when I get back, I gotta go shopping. When I get back, I'm gonna put in my spare speaker. You should always have a spare speaker, and then we'll check it out. But what I'm saying is sometimes you go into the repair hell. And believe me, I know a couple other guys that have, you know, you pull your hair out, and I sweated for 3 hours, but either way, I think it's fine. It's in good shape. Thank goodness my wiring was fine. And, oh, I'm sending that speaker, and then the other one was, both top ones were reconed by him, and I just had those reconed probably a year ago. Done in Indiana, speaker workshop, Tom Colvin. He used to become highly recommended. I was a little disappointed when I sent it up there, and he said he would put the proper voice coil in it, and he went with Captan anyway. Orange County speaker in Garden Grove. I'm sending these all the way to, or at least this one, all the way to California from Louisiana, because they did my other amp, the 60, with paper voice coil formers. Thing sounds fantastic. I seriously will probably send both of them. I don't care right now. I'm going to get the paper voice coil formers and just be done with it. And won't be going back to Tom Colvin anytime soon. Alright, hope this helps. Okay, long story. After I changed the heater wires and after I fixed the rectifier tube, I turn it on, first chord, the amp sounds like shit. Excuse my language. Anyway, I spent 3 hours trying to figure out what it was, and that was a long session of troubleshooting, believe me. I had to remove every speaker, but this was the problem. I guess the amp is so strong now. That first chord I hit blew this speaker. At least I got voice coil rub now. Hear it? And it's sporadic. It's only on one side. But either way, I'm going to Orange County reconers this time. This one didn't last more than about less than a year and a half. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I think the amp is sounding really nice. I'm so happy I switched the heater wires and got them It seems more like the 1960 to me now. Talk to you later.